Hey, Bourbon Bay, this is Steve, your host. Um, so this episode is going to be a little bit different. We're going to have two lovely bourbons on the channel today, and we're going to discuss those. And, it was a crazy week last week. Didn't get a chance to really try anything or do make an episode because of course, we had Hurricane Elsa, Tropical Storm Elsa, whatever you want to call it. We also had a pretty crazy week with the Tampa Bay Lightning winning the Stanley Cup champions against the Montreal Canadiens in 5. So, yeah, I know there's probably going to be some people out there that hate that, but hey, you know what? It was a great series, hard-fought playoffs by both teams. Montreal really surprised a lot, and they have a great young, talented core, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they do next year, especially when things hopefully get back more to normal and when we get back to the normal divisions. So, and also this is going to be a crazy offseason with Seattle Krakens coming in now. They're going to have the expansion draft come July 29th, I believe, or 28th. If I don't know that, or if I'm totally wrong, please comment. Write it down in the comments. Let me know. And then I also just started a new expanded this podcast to Spotify. And so go check it out. Again, it's Bourbon Bay Talks on Spotify. I have one episode up there now. So I hope you guys go check it out. Give it a listen. A little bit what we're going to discuss in this episode is also going to be on there. Go a little bit more in depth on some things in there. I think that is going to kind of give me an opportunity to kind of expand. We're going to probably hopefully do some interviews on that. And thank you, Matty Savage, getting me this brand new mic. Hope it makes the audio a lot better for you guys to enjoy. And so I just hope you guys enjoy this episode. Again, we're going to discuss these two lovely bourbons. So as always, guys, I hope you come and join me for a drink. Going to start off actually with the Blade and Bow. And again, as always, let me know what you guys are having. Write it down in the comments. Because I always love to hear and share some, and enjoy. I mean, this is what this podcast is all about. It's about enjoying the experience together, sharing everything, and, just having a great time, sharing stories, because that's what bourbon's all about. It really helps you kind of slow things down, enjoy the time with your best friends and your family. So, hope you guys enjoy me. Write in the comments what you guys are having or what would you like me to talk about. But again, cheers. Here's the Blade and Bow. And kind of a great little story before I have my first sip. This is from the Stitzer Weller Distillery. And as you notice, it has the 5 keys on here, which actually, when the Stitzer Weller Distillery first started back in 1930s, Pappy Van Winkle, as many of you who are bourbon enthusiasts are going to know that. This was what he had hanging in front of the distillery on the door, and the 5 keys actually stand for the 5 processes of bourbon. The milling, the grains, the milling, the distillation, the fermentation, and the aging process. And Stitzer Weller with the Blade and Bow, they actually have these little keys that you can collect when you get the different bottles. They are numbered. So like this is key number 3. And I heard that to show you guys over on Twitch as well. And so apparently just like the Bland's bottles, once you collect all the keys, you can send it in to the Blade and Bow and you can join their 5 key society. It is on their website. I can definitely go ahead and add that website to my description. It'll be down in the description. And basically, guys, so it's a really nice little bourbon. Has that little story from the famous Stitzer Weller Distillery, and it does have a connection, which I will go into with Weller, which this is one of probably the most sought after bottles. I always get this question at work every day. Do you guys have Weller? Sadly, a lot of times I have to tell people no, because it's definitely a hard one. I was able to pick this up, and it is a really nice smooth bourbon, and we'll definitely discuss that. But kind of getting back to the Blade and Bow, It came in, I think, around the 90s is when it first started. And if I'm totally wrong, you guys can write down in the comments. Let me know. Again, this is a podcast for everybody. So, yeah. And that's kind of the story of it as we try it. And you see it's definitely got that nice, lovely amber color to it. And yeah, lately, I don't know what it is, but it feels like every time now that I have some bourbon, just because I listened to one podcast, Bourbon Life over on Spotify, and one of the guys on there talked about how when he tried a rye or even some bourbons that have a little bit more rye in it, that he gets a bubblegum flavor to it. So now I've been smelling that. You definitely get that nice like orange citrus notes in it. Get that butterscotch, and then almost like a little hint of blueberry. So definitely going to try it out now. Oopsie. But yeah, so yeah, you definitely kind of get that toasted cereal note, like what Blade and Bow puts down at as their tasting flavors profile. Definitely get that nice little warm spice to it and that dry fruit. I also get a little bit of honey in there as well. And it definitely, yeah, it's a very nice, easy drinking bourbon. And definitely highly recommend it for sure. So kind of just finish up. So cheers to my boys, the Bolts. So now I'm going to have a lovely little Weller. And it's going to clear my palate a little bit. Okay. So now I got the Weller. And great story behind the Weller is that how these two kind of have a connection was that the Stutzer Weller Distillery, before it became the Stutzer Weller Distillery, the Weller family immigrated to the U.S. from Germany back in the 1740s. So, of course, America at the time was still a colony of Britain. And they came, like many other immigrants, kind of escaping religious persecution, came to the colonies, settled in Pennsylvania. They were really, they were farmers and eventually became millers. And then I think it was the third generation. So like in the 1790s to about early 1800s, they moved to what is now the lovely bluegrass state, or now Kentucky. And yeah, and then they again opened up a farm and then started distilling like many other people down there in Kentucky. And so they basically have been distilling, the Weller family, and then Pappy Van Winkle joined the Weller distillery in about, sorry guys, I'm going to check real quick. So yeah, and Pappy Van Winkle, which is probably going to be the most famous person that many bourbon enthusiasts are going to know. Julian Pappy Van Winkle joined the Weller distillery in 1893. And from then on, they kind of then merged with the Stutzer distillery, and that became the Stutzer Weller distillery many years later, about 50 or so years later. Became the famous Stutzer Weller distillery, opening on Derby Day, which of course the Kentucky Derby, in 1935. And now that's kind of that connection that they have, because the Stutzer Weller distillery at that point was owned by the Van Winkle family, making things such as the first wheated bourbon. This is considered the first wheated bourbon in the world. Now there could have been definitely others that made wheated bourbons, but this was the big one. This is what's considered the first. And so once, and it was kind of interesting that the story goes based off the book Pappyland, that Julian Van Winkle Jr., who was the master distiller, the owner of the distillery at the time, about 1964, right when bourbon just got its designation as the America Spirit, was also kind of the downturn of bourbon. By this point, everybody was starting to say, look, hey, Vietnam's over. I don't want to drink what my dad drank. I don't want to drink what my mom drank. And bourbon was considered your dad's drink. So they started to switch over to things like vodka, gin, things that were quick, easy, made a lot of cocktails. So that was kind of like considered almost the death of bourbon. It went into such a thing. And Julian Van Winkle almost kind of had a rift with his family where his sister, according to the book, wanted to sell based off of information she got from a lot of the board of directors through Stitzer Weller, that this was the time to sell, and she didn't. But of course, Julian Van Winkle did not want to sell. He wanted to have a family business for his sons. But after a couple years, eventually he didn't want to cause a rift between his family because family was very important to him, just like always. And so he ended up selling the distillery, and it closed down in the 90s, and then basically was purchased by Diageo, I think mid-90s, and reopened as another Stitzer Weller distillery, and they started making the Blade and Bow. I think Bars something is another one. I'm sorry. I meant to write it down what the other bourbons they make. I think they also make Bullet Bourbon out of that same distillery. And yeah, so it kind of still to this day is kind of a sore spot with the Van Winkle family. But, you know, the Van Winkle family, all their recipes, the Weller recipe, the Pappy Van Winkle recipe that everybody wants, and it's probably one of the most highly sought after bourbons in the world. That was purchased by the Buffalo Trace Distillery in the 90s. And now Julian Van Winkle Jr. and his son are now with the Buffalo Trace Distillery, and they are making Pappy's and Weller, and they're trying it out, tasting it, making sure, sorry guys, that it kind of lives up to those old recipes and that they used to make. So now kind of getting into it. I know there was a lot of explanation to it, guys. So see this, you get more of that honey in there. You get more caramel. You definitely get a little bit more, almost like if you guys ever had potato bread and, you know, you get that nice sweetness to it. That's almost kind of like what this smells like. And you can tell it's a little bit lighter in color, but I believe it is aged at least 7 years. I think that's pretty much the standard at Buffalo Trace Distillery. They age pretty much all their stuff at least 7 years. That's why it takes so long to get it. So yeah, guys. So we're going to try it out now for you. Yeah, so definitely get that caramel, get that honey for sure. You definitely get that toasted cereal in there. Not as much dry fruit. Again, it's a wheated bourbon, so you're not going to get really a lot of that characteristics. Tend to get more of that woodiness in there as well. So just a really good flavored, smooth, and it's smooth. I mean, this is why a lot of people love this bourbon. It is a smooth bourbon. So just a really nice, easy drinking. If you just want to sit and enjoy, watch some TV, or sit around with your family and just have a nice little bourbon after a long, hard day at work, this is definitely that bourbon for sure. So yeah, as we kind of talk about that history now, and as we always do, yeah. So I mean, kind of like that one question is that, you know, just like who started bourbon, who invented bourbon, like I talked about in the last episode. Do you guys have a clue on how bourbon got its name? Was it Bourbon County, Kentucky, or was it Bourbon Street, New Orleans, or were they paying homage to the House of Bourbon from France because they had contributed so much to the war effort during the Revolutionary War? So yeah, those are a couple of the stories that on how bourbon got its name. Another aspect was it, and I know this episode's getting a little long, but hey, sometimes you got all this information and I want to share that with you guys. So yeah, I mean, and one of the other stories is that, of course, back in the 1700s, whiskey makers were trying to get their whiskey to people as quick as possible so they could make a profit, help feed their families. But they had some difficulty. I mean, here you are in Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and there weren't really the roads that we have today. There weren't the trains. There weren't the planes. So yeah, the most reliable form of transportation at the time was flatboats, because Kentucky, if you go up there, is, and if you'll know, is just full of rivers. And so that was how, and basically they had to wait for the rivers to fill up so they could take the flatboats and take them down to New Orleans, which was the biggest port at the time in the US. And yeah, so they basically would have to wait. And so while they waited, they put the whiskeys in oak barrels or charred oak barrels to kind of store it. And so, of course, by the time that, they made, and a lot of these, a lot of these bourbon makers were farmers. So they basically made their bourbon in the wintertime. And of course, they farmed in the summers and the spring. And so they had to wait for the rivers once. So they would do a lot of the distilling like in September, October, and they wouldn't be able to ship out the product probably until about, April, May. So yeah, at least by that point, I had about 8 to 9 months of aging. So, I mean, granted, most bourbons today, like we just talked about, are 6 to 7, 8 years, 10 years. These are definitely not the bourbons that, you would have known today. Not aged as long, but it was long enough for them to get that lovely red liquor color, as it was actually called back then. There's actually some historical documents that have Lincoln and Ewing discussing red liquor. And so, yeah, these are just some of the different things. And basically, you didn't really get that aging process to become commonplace until about the 19th century. And, it had to come from at least a couple people who were waiting on these barrels to ship out to market. And, they probably tried some, while they were waiting. And that's kind of when they discovered that, wow, hey, these barrels really make this whiskey taste great. It's a lot smoother. It gets that good color. It gives it some other flavors, so a lot of that comes from that. And so, it had to come trial and error, just different things. And of course, as we know, like Elijah Craig and John Ritchie were probably aging the barrels, but not a whole lot of evidence of it, but they were probably aging it just like everybody else. And, that practice didn't really come into effect until like 50 years later with the aging of barrels, when someone probably, when a lot of people discover like, oh crap, this stuff actually tastes really good after you age it a while in barrels. So, I mean, because of those processes, and because of, that, time of having to wait to get the product from, up in Kentucky, up in Pennsylvania, up in Tennessee, to down to markets like New Orleans, the Big Easy, which was where a lot of that comes from. The fact is like, okay, well, this is probably where bourbon might get its name, is from Bourbon Street up in up in New Orleans. So that's kind of one of those aspects. And yeah, so that's kind of part of that history. So, I mean, I hope you guys definitely enjoyed this episode. If you did, definitely, or hey, if you got any feedback for me, I'm always welcome to feedback. So please write down in the comments. Let me know the answer to the question that I asked a little bit earlier in the episode. And yeah, and again, always go check out my other podcasts on Spotify. There's, I'm trying to see what works best. Always try to improve. Again, thank you, Matt, for the new mic. And hopefully it helped the sound quality a little bit. So again, write comments, let me know. And if you guys really enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe down below, as we got it. So always love the support, and hope, that we can continue or keep this going. And if you guys have any ideas or want me to talk about some other bourbons, again, write them down in the comments so I get to know. And then, I'll definitely look into it. I have a new Instagram page as well that you guys can check out as well. It's called Bourbon Bay Talks 88. It's all one word. And so always looking forward to new ideas. Because like I said, I'm learning about this. I know I'm probably not the best podcaster out there, but I'm trying to improve every day. So I hope you guys enjoy. And as always, if you guys are going to have a drink, have it with me, and cheers.